The humid air of Guadalcanal wrapped around Corporal Takashi Yamamoto like a wet blanket. It was August 1942, and the jungle felt alive with danger. Takashi crouched behind a fallen tree, his Arisaka rifle gripped tightly in sweating hands. 6 months ago, his unit had been celebrating victories across the Pacific. Now, everything felt different. The war had started well for Japan. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia like a storm. They took the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and dozens of islands. American forces retreated everywhere. Japanese soldiers believed they were invincible. Their officers told them Americans were weak, spoiled by comfortable lives. The jungle would break them. Takashi had believed those words. But Guadalcanal was teaching him otherwise. His squad of 12 men moved quietly through the dense vegetation near Henderson Field. The Americans had landed on the island weeks ago, and fierce fighting erupted immediately. The jungle was so thick that soldiers could pass within 10 feet of each other without seeing a thing. Every shadow could hide death. Every sound could be the enemy. Sergeant Saito raised his fist, signaling the squad to stop. Something was wrong. The jungle had gone quiet. No birds, no insects, just heavy silence pressing down like a weight. Then Takashi heard it. A strange rustling ahead. Not the careful movement of experienced soldiers. Something else. Heavier. Closer. Americans, whispered Private Koji beside him. 3, maybe 4. Sergeant Saito gestured for the squad to spread out. They had done this dozens of times. The Americans made noise when they moved. Japanese soldiers were trained to be silent. This ambush would be easy. Takashi positioned himself behind a thick tree trunk. Through the green curtain of leaves, he could see movement. Brown uniforms. American Marines. They were only 30 feet away. His finger touched the trigger. The explosion of sound shattered the jungle, but it was not rifle fire. It was something else. Something terrible. A thunderous boom erupted from the vegetation. Not the sharp crack of a rifle. This was deeper, louder, like a cannon compacted into a smaller weapon. The sound echoed through the trees in a way Takashi had never heard before. 3 men from his squad fell instantly. Not shot cleanly like rifle wounds. They collapsed as if struck by multiple bullets at once. Their bodies torn and shredded. Another boom. Another soldier down. Takashi's mind could not process what was happening. How could one shot kill multiple men? How could a weapon fire so many projectiles at once? Retreat. Sergeant Saito screamed. Fall back. The remaining soldiers scrambled backward through the jungle. Takashi ran blindly, branches slashing his face. Behind him, that terrible booming sound continued. Each blast seemed to shake the very air. They did not stop running until they reached their defensive lines. 8 men had entered the jungle. Only 5 returned. That evening, Takashi sat with the survivors around a small fire. Nobody spoke for a long time. They had all seen combat before. They had faced enemy fire and returned it. But this was different. This was wrong somehow. Sergeant Saito finally broke the silence. I saw one of them, he said quietly. The Marine with that weapon. It was shorter than a rifle. Thick barrel. He fired from the hip and swept it across like a broom. What kind of weapon does that? Private Koji asked. His hands were still shaking. An older soldier from another unit overheard them. He limped over, his leg bandaged from an earlier battle. You met the trench broom, he said. That is what the Americans call it. A shotgun. Shotgun. Takashi repeated the strange word. The veteran nodded. I fought in China. I heard stories from soldiers who faced Germans in the First War. The Germans used similar weapons in the trenches. Very effective at close range. But the Americans perfected them. These new ones fire multiple pellets with each shot. 9 small bullets spreading out in a pattern. In the jungle, where everything is close, it is devastating. Takashi thought about what he saw. One trigger pull. Multiple men down. The weapon did not need precise aim. In thick jungle where you could barely see your enemy, it just needed to point in the general direction. How do we fight against it? Sergeant Saito asked. The veteran shrugged. Stay at distance. Use our rifle range advantage. But in this jungle? He gestured at the dark trees surrounding them. Distance means nothing here. You see the enemy at 10 meters or not at all. That night, Takashi tried to sleep but could not. He kept hearing that boom in his mind. Kept seeing his comrades fall. The Americans were supposed to be easy to defeat. They were supposed to be soft, unprepared for jungle warfare. But these Marines moved through the jungle like they owned it. And they carried weapons perfectly designed for close-range slaughter. Around him, other soldiers whispered in the darkness. The stories were spreading. Tales of Americans who could kill entire squads with a few shots. Of weapons that turned narrow trails into killing grounds. Of Marines who hunted at night, their shotgun blasts echoing like thunder. Takashi pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to his family. He told them he was safe. He told them the war was going well. He told them all the things a good soldier should write, but he did not tell them the truth. He did not write about the fear growing in his chest. He did not describe the weapon that changed everything they thought they knew about warfare. He did not admit that for the first time since joining the army, he wondered if Japan could actually lose this war. The jungle night pressed close around their camp. Somewhere in the darkness, American Marines were moving, and they carried their trench brooms with them. Takashi folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pack. Tomorrow, they would patrol again. Tomorrow, they might hear that terrible boom once more. The war had changed. And Corporal Takashi Yamamoto was beginning to understand just how much. September rain hammered the metal roof of the transport ship. Corporal Takashi Yamamoto stood on deck with other soldiers, watching Guadalcanal disappear behind them. His unit was being transferred to another island, New Georgia, a fresh battlefield. But the stories traveled with them. The Pacific War was barely 9 months old, but already it looked different from what Japanese command had promised. After the stunning victories of early 1942, American forces were pushing back. The battle for Guadalcanal raged on. Henderson Field changed hands multiple times. Every day brought news of more casualties. Takashi leaned against the ship railing. Below deck, soldiers were talking, and always about the same thing. My cousin's unit encountered them near the Matanakaw River, one soldier said. 5 men killed by 2 Marines. 2 men with those shotguns held off an entire squad. I heard they can shoot around corners, another claimed. The bullets bounce off trees. Not bullets, a third corrected. Pellets. Small metal balls. 9 of them per shot. Takashi listened, but said nothing. He had seen it himself. No need to add to the wild stories. The truth was terrible enough. Sergeant Saito appeared beside him. The older man looked tired. Lines had deepened around his eyes in just a few weeks. The men are scared, he said quietly. Fear spreads faster than disease. Can you blame them? Takashi replied. Saito shook his head. No, I cannot. I have fought in 3 campaigns. China, Malaya, now this. I have never seen a weapon that creates such fear. He paused. Do you know what happened in the First World War? Tell me. The Americans used these shotguns in the trenches in France. 1918. The German army officially protested. They called the weapons inhumane, too cruel for warfare. They threatened to execute any American soldier captured with a shotgun. Takashi stared at him. The Germans? The same Germans who used poison gas. Yes, even they feared this weapon. The Americans refused to stop using them. They said if shotguns were banned, they would ban German sawback bayonets and flamethrowers. Saito lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The war ended before anything was decided. But now, 24 years later, the Americans brought them back. And they made them better. The ship rolled on a wave. Takashi gripped the railing. What do you mean better? The new models are more reliable. They work in wet conditions. They hold more shells. The Winchester Model 1897 and Model 12. Military versions designed specifically for combat. In the trenches, they called them trench guns. Now, in the jungle, the Marines call them jungle sweepers. Over the next 3 days at sea, Takashi watched fear transform his unit. These were experienced soldiers, men who had fought and won battles across Asia. But the shotgun had gotten into their heads. At night, men woke screaming from nightmares. They dreamed of that thunderous boom. They saw comrades falling, their bodies torn by buckshot. Some refused to eat. Others wrote final letters home, convinced they would die on the next island. The officers tried to maintain discipline. They gave speeches about Japanese superiority and fighting spirit. But the words rang hollow. Spirit could not stop 9 pellets fired at close range. When they landed on New Georgia in late September, reality proved worse than the stories. The Americans had learned how to use their shotguns with devastating efficiency. They placed shotgun-armed Marines at the front of every patrol. These point men moved carefully through the jungle, their weapons ready. When they spotted Japanese positions, They did not wait for rifle support. They simply fired. Takashi's first week on New Georgia taught him brutal lessons. The Americans were using new tactics built around the shotgun's strengths. Cave entrances became death traps. Japanese soldiers would fortify cave positions, thinking the narrow opening would protect them. Then Marines would toss in grenades and immediately follow with shotgun blasts. The pellets ricocheted off cave walls, hitting targets even around corners. The stories about shooting around corners were not completely wrong. Bunker clearing became quick and efficient. Americans would approach a bunker from the blind side, then fire shotgun blasts through gun slits before occupants could react. The spread of pellets meant they did not need to aim precisely. If the barrel pointed at the opening, someone inside would die. Night fighting became psychological warfare. Marines deliberately used their shotguns during darkness. The muzzle flash was enormous, lighting up the jungle. The boom echoed for hundreds of yards. Every Japanese soldier in earshot would freeze, wondering if they were next. One night, Takashi was on guard duty when he heard it. That distinctive boom, perhaps 200 yards away. Then another. Then silence. In the morning, they found 8 Japanese soldiers dead at their posts. A small Marine patrol had moved through the area, killing silently except for the shotgun blasts. The Americans wanted them to hear. Sergeant Saito gathered the squad one evening. "We need to adapt," he said. "Avoid close combat. Use our rifles at distance. Set ambushes at 50 meters or more." Private Koji laughed bitterly. "Have you seen this jungle? 50 meters? We are lucky to see 15 meters. The Americans know this. They fight the jungle war better than we do." It was true. The Americans had trained specifically for Pacific Island combat. They studied jungle fighting. They developed weapons and tactics for close-quarters battle. Meanwhile, Japanese forces had prepared to fight the previous war. Takashi wrote another letter that night. This time he was more honest. He wrote about facing a new kind of warfare, about weapons that changed the rules, about fear that affected even veteran soldiers. He still did not mail it. Some truths were too dangerous to share. Around the camp, soldiers whispered the name. Trench broom, jungle sweeper, the demon gun. Different names for the same nightmare. American forces were advancing across the Pacific. Each island they took, they brought their shotguns. Each battle, more Japanese soldiers learned to fear that distinctive boom. And the worst part? They were only beginning to understand how outmatched they were. Captain Nakamura stood before the assembled soldiers, his face carved from stone. It was November 1942, and losses were mounting. The Americans controlled more territory each week. Something had to change. Takashi sat with his squad in the morning heat. Around him, 50 soldiers waited to hear their commanding officer speak. Everyone knew what this meeting was about. The shotgun problem. "We are soldiers of the Emperor," Captain Nakamura began. "We have faced many enemies and prevailed. But warfare evolves. We must evolve with it or die." The captain had fought in China for 3 years before the Pacific War. He was practical, not idealistic. His men respected him because he kept them alive through intelligence rather than blind courage. "The American shotgun is effective because we keep fighting on their terms," he continued. "Close range, dense jungle, narrow trails. These conditions favor their weapon. So we changed the conditions." Over the next hour, Captain Nakamura outlined new tactics. Longer-range ambushes, avoiding trail warfare, using clearings and rivers to force distance between forces, setting traps that would detonate before Americans got close, fighting from elevated positions where shotguns could not reach. On paper, the tactics made sense. In reality, they proved nearly impossible to implement. The jungle did not cooperate. Every island was covered in thick vegetation. Clearings were rare. Rivers were narrow. Elevation meant rocky hills where soldiers could barely climb, much less fight effectively. The Pacific Theater was designed for close combat. Worse, the Americans kept pressing forward. They did not wait for Japanese forces to choose the battlefield. Marine patrols moved constantly, forcing engagements at close range. Their shotgun-equipped point men ensured any surprise encounter favored Americans. Takashi experienced this firsthand during a patrol in mid-November. His squad carefully positioned themselves along a ridge overlooking a trail. 50 meters of clear sight. Perfect range for their Arisaka rifles. Captain Nakamura's new tactics in action, they waited for hours. Finally, movement below. A Marine patrol, 8 men strong. The Japanese soldiers took aim, but the Marines did not take the trail. Instead, they moved through the jungle beside it, completely invisible in the thick vegetation. The first Takashi knew of their actual position was when a shotgun boomed 30 feet to his left. Two soldiers died instantly. The ambush became chaos. The Marines were inside their perimeter, exactly where the shotgun was most deadly. The careful planning meant nothing. Only 4 members of Takashi's squad made it back to camp. The failures continued. Every new tactic was countered. Japanese forces tried night attacks to avoid daytime fighting. The Americans used their shotguns defensively, devastating any force that got close. They tried fortifying positions and waiting for Americans to attack. The Marines simply bypassed them, cut supply lines, and starved them out. Then came the order that would haunt Takashi forever, December 1942. American forces were pushing hard across New Georgia. Japanese commanders decided on a desperate measure. A banzai charge, the traditional tactic. Overwhelming force. Fighting spirit over tactics. It had worked in China. It had worked in Malaya. It would not work here. Captain Nakamura argued against the order. Takashi overheard him shouting at the radio operator, trying to contact higher command. It is suicide against those weapons, the captain said. We need artillery support, not a charge. But orders were orders. The assault was scheduled for dawn. 200 Japanese soldiers assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. Takashi checked his rifle for the 5th time. Around him, men prayed. Some tied headbands bearing the rising sun. Others wrote final messages to families. Today we proved Japanese fighting spirit is stronger than American weapons, an officer announced. We will overrun their positions through courage and speed. They cannot kill us all before we reach them. The officer was wrong. When dawn broke, the charge began. 200 men screaming, running through the jungle toward American lines. The distance was 400 meters. They needed to cross it fast, get close, overwhelm the defenders. They made it 200 meters. The Americans had prepared. They established a defensive line with machine guns, rifles, and at least a dozen soldiers with shotguns positioned at key points. They let the charging Japanese forces close the distance. They wanted them close at 100 meters. American machine guns opened fire. Men fell, but the charge continued. Japanese soldiers were trained to push through casualties. Fighting spirit demanded 50 meters. Rifles joined in. More men fell, but still they came at 20 meters. The shotguns began. The sound was continuous thunder. Boom after boom after boom. Each blast cut down multiple charging soldiers. The men with shotguns did not need to aim carefully. They just pointed at the mass of attackers and fired. Takashi saw Private Koji disappear in a red mist. Saw Sergeant Saito fall clutching his chest. Saw dozens of brave men cut down like grass before a machine. The charge broke. Not from cowardice. Simply because there was nobody left to charge. Of the 200 who started, perhaps 60 made it back to Japanese lines. The rest lay dead or dying in the jungle. Takashi collapsed behind a tree, his ears ringing. He had not fired a single shot. Had not even gotten close enough to see the enemy clearly. Just that terrible boom, over and over. Captain Nakamura found him there an hour later. The captain's uniform was torn, his face blackened with powder. Now you understand, he said quietly. Courage cannot defeat technology. Spirit cannot stop buckshot. We are fighting the wrong war with the wrong tactics. That night, Takashi wrote the longest letter yet. He wrote about the charge, about watching good men die uselessly, about tactics designed for a different kind of war proving worse than useless here. He wrote about understanding, finally, that Japan was losing. He burned the letter before dawn. Some truths were too dangerous even to write, but the truth remained. The shotgun had changed everything, and Japanese forces had no answer for it. The caves of Bougainville Island seemed like salvation. Deep tunnels carved into volcanic rock, connected by narrow passages, protected by thick stone. Captain Nakamura surveyed the defensive position with satisfaction. Here we have the advantage, he told his remaining men. It was late December 1942. After months of retreating and dying, they finally had a position where American shotguns would be useless. Takashi helped position supplies in the main cave. Around him, 30 soldiers worked to create a fortress. They set machine guns at key entrances, placed ammunition and food in protected alcoves, built firing positions where defenders could see approaching enemies while remaining protected. The cave complex had 8 entrances scattered across a hillside. Inside, the tunnels connected everything. Defenders could move between positions while attackers would be exposed. The narrow entrance passages would negate the shotgun spread. Americans would have to come in single file, where rifle fire would be most effective. For the first time in months, Takashi felt hopeful. That hope lasted 3 days. American forces arrived on a rainy dawn. The attack began with artillery. Shells crashed into the hillside, shaking the caves. Rocks fell from ceilings. Dust choked the air. But the soldiers were deep enough that the bombardment could not reach them. After an hour, the artillery stopped. Silence fell. "They will come now," Captain Nakamura said. "Remember your training. Fire only when you have clear targets. Make every shot count. We can hold this position for weeks if we stay disciplined." Takashi crouched at one of the smaller cave entrances with 4 other soldiers. The opening was barely 3 feet wide, perfect for defense. He could see down the hillside through the narrow gap. Any American approaching would be silhouetted against the sky. Movement caught his eye. Americans advancing up the hill. But they moved differently than before. More carefully. They carried different equipment. Then Takashi saw it. The flamethrower. A stream of fire erupted from the nozzle, shooting into a cave entrance 50 yards away. Smoke billowed out. Then screaming. Japanese soldiers stumbled from the entrance, their uniforms burning. Shotgun blasts cut them down before they made it 3 steps. The pattern repeated at the next entrance. Flames. Smoke. Soldiers forced out. Shotguns waiting. "They are smoking us out like rats," Private Yoshi said beside Takashi. His voice shook, but the Americans had more tricks. At another entrance, Marines threw grenades inside. The explosions echoed through connected tunnels. Before the dust settled, soldiers with shotguns rushed the entrance and fired blindly into the smoke. Takashi heard screaming from inside the cave complex. The grenades had killed or wounded defenders at that position. The shotgun blasts finished anyone left alive. "Fall back to the main chamber," Captain Nakamura's voice called through the tunnels. "Consolidate our defense." Takashi and his group abandoned their position, scrambling through narrow passages toward the central cave. Behind them, they heard Americans entering their old position. The booming of shotguns echoed through the stone corridors. The main chamber was chaos. Wounded men lay everywhere. The air was thick with dust and smoke. Defenders fired out of 3 remaining entrances while Americans pressed from all sides. Captain Nakamura stood in the center, directing the defense. His sword was drawn, though it would be useless against modern weapons. It was a symbol, a statement that they would fight to the end. "They cannot use flamethrowers in these narrow tunnels," the captain shouted. "The stone will protect us. Hold your positions." He was half right. The flamethrowers could not reach deep into the complex. But the Americans adapted. They threw grenades into the tunnels, bouncing them off walls so they rolled deep inside before exploding. The confined space made each explosion devastating. Fragments ricocheted off stone, hitting targets that would have been safe in open air. Then came the shotguns. Marines would throw a grenade, wait for the explosion, then immediately fire shotgun blasts into the tunnel entrance. They did not aim at specific targets. They did not need to. The pellets bounced off tunnel walls, spreading through the confined space like deadly rain. Takashi watched in horror as defenders fell to buckshot that came from around corners. The Americans did not even need to enter the tunnels. They just fired into them blindly, letting the stone walls do the rest. "This is impossible," Yoshi cried. "How do we fight this?" There was no answer. The Americans had turned the cave complex from a fortress into a tomb. Captain Nakamura made a decision. "We counterattack. Push them back from the eastern entrance. If we can break through, we escape into the jungle." It was desperation, but staying meant death. 15 soldiers followed the captain toward the eastern tunnel. Takashi was among them. They rushed through the narrow passage, rifles ready. Ahead, they could see daylight. The entrance was close. If they moved fast, they might overwhelm the defenders before shotguns could reload. They made it halfway. The tunnel entrance erupted in thunder. Marines had positioned 3 soldiers with shotguns directly at the opening. As Japanese soldiers came around the final bend, all 3 fired simultaneously. The tunnel became a kill box. Pellets filled the narrow space. Ricochets multiplied the danger. Men fell on top of each other. Takashi felt something slam into his left shoulder. Pain exploded through his body. He fell backward, hitting the stone floor hard. Around him, others fell. He could not tell who was alive and who was dead. Through fading vision, he saw Captain Nakamura at the tunnel entrance. The captain had somehow made it through the shotgun fire. His sword was raised. 3 Americans stood before him, their shotguns pointed at his chest. Captain Nakamura charged. .3 booms echoed through the tunnel. The last thing Takashi saw before unconsciousness took him was his captain falling, his sword clattering on stone, his body torn by buckshot. The fortress had fallen in 6 hours. A position they thought could hold for weeks had lasted a single morning, and the American shotgun had been the key to it all. Pain woke Takashi. His left shoulder felt like fire burned beneath the skin. He opened his eyes to dim light filtering through canvas. A field hospital. The smell of blood and medicine filled the air. "You are awake." A medic appeared beside his cot. "You were lucky. The buckshot fragments missed major blood vessels. You will live, though your shoulder will never be the same." Takashi tried to sit up and gasped at the pain. "How many survived?" The medic's face told the story before his words did. "From the cave complex? 7. Out of 30. Captain Nakamura died, leading the final charge. He was hit by 3 shotgun blasts simultaneously. 7 survivors." Takashi closed his eyes. Good men. Brave soldiers. Dead because they tried to defend an indefensible position against a weapon they still did not fully understand. Over the following days, Takashi learned the full scope of the disaster. The cave complex fell in 6 hours. Similar fortifications across the island fell just as quickly. The combination of flamethrowers, grenades, and shotguns proved unstoppable in close-quarters combat. American forces were pushing across the entire Pacific now. January 1943 brought news from multiple fronts. Guadalcanal was nearly lost. New Georgia was under American control. Japanese supply lines were stretched and breaking. The early victories of 1942 seemed like distant memories that a wounded officer visited the hospital in mid-January. Major Tanaka had lost his right arm to a grenade but remained on active duty. He gathered the recovered soldiers around him. "Command has issued new tactical guidelines," he announced. "We are officially acknowledging that jungle warfare has changed. The American shotgun, combined with their flamethrowers and aggressive tactics, requires complete revision of our defensive strategies." The major outlined the new approach. Avoid fortified positions that could be surrounded. Emphasize long-range combat whenever possible. Use the terrain to maintain distance. Conduct more nighttime operations when visibility limited shotgun effectiveness. Focus on disrupting American supply lines rather than holding territory. It was an admission of defeat without saying the words. The Imperial Japanese Army was no longer trying to win. They were trying to survive. Takashi was assigned to a replacement unit 2 weeks later. His shoulder still hurt, but the medics declared him fit for duty. He joined a squad of mostly new soldiers, young men fresh from training who had never heard a shotgun boom in person. He recognized the look in their eyes. The same confidence he had carried in early 1942. The same belief in Japanese superiority. The same ignorance of what war really meant. "Is it true about the American shotguns?" one young private asked Takashi during their first night together. The stories sound exaggerated. Takashi pulled up his shirt, showing the scarred tissue across his shoulder. "I was hit by buckshot that ricocheted off a cave wall. The American who fired was around a corner. He could not see me. Did not need to. The weapon does not care about cover or concealment at close range." The young soldiers stared at his scars. "Everything you learned in training is designed for the wrong war," Takashi continued. "The Americans fight differently. They bring industrial efficiency to killing. Their shotgun is not just a weapon. It is a symbol of how they approach warfare. Why use precision when overwhelming force is faster?" The squad leader, a sergeant named Kimura, silenced further questions. But Takashi knew the young soldiers would learn soon enough. The shotgun would teach them, just as it taught everyone. Their first patrol came 3 days later. Moving through jungle on an island Takashi never bothered learning the name of. All the islands blurred together now. All the same thick vegetation. All the same deadly close-quarters combat. The sound came without warning. That distinctive boom, maybe 200 yards away through the trees. Every soldier in the squad froze. "Just a shotgun," Sergeant Kimura said, trying to sound calm. It cannot reach us from that distance. But Takashi felt his heart pounding. His hands shook. His shoulder throbbed where the buckshot scars remained. The sound brought everything back. The cave complex. Captain Nakamura's final charge. The screaming of dying men. This was the true weapon, he realized. Not the pellets, or the spread, or the devastating close-range power. The true weapon was fear. Every Japanese soldier who survived a shotgun encounter carried that fear forever. And the Americans knew it. They used their shotguns loudly, deliberately, making sure everyone heard. Psychological warfare at its finest. That evening, Takashi wrote a final journal entry. He had given up on letters home. What could he tell his family? That their son was terrified? That Japan was losing a war it had started so confidently? That a simple hunting weapon had helped turn the tide of the Pacific campaign? Instead, he wrote honestly in his private journal about how warfare had evolved beyond what Japanese military doctrine could handle. About how American industrial power created weapons like the Winchester Model 97 and Model 12, then produced thousands of them. About how Marine training specifically prepared soldiers for jungle combat, while Japanese training prepared them to fight China. That he wrote about the human cost. Good men like Captain Nakamura, dead because pride prevented adaptation. Young soldiers fed into a meat grinder because admitting defeat was unacceptable. An entire generation learning that courage and fighting spirit could not stop buckshot. The war would continue for years yet. Takashi knew this. More islands would be fought over. More men would die. More Japanese soldiers would learn to fear that distinctive boom echoing through the jungle. But the lesson was already clear to anyone willing to see it. The Americans had brought weapons suited for close-quarters combat. They had trained specifically for jungle warfare. They had adapted and innovated while Japanese forces relied on outdated tactics and blind faith in fighting spirit. The shotgun was just one weapon, but it represented everything wrong with how Japan was fighting this war. And every boom reminded soldiers like Takashi that they were facing an enemy who fought smarter, not just harder. He closed his journal and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, American forces were advancing. Their shotguns ready, their tactics proven, and Japanese soldiers everywhere heard that boom in their nightmares. The war had changed, and it would never change back.